Photography really is just another way to communicate. And therefore, if you have nothing to communicate, your photographs will always lack something. Photography can be to preserve or to express. You can preserve the world around you, or you can express your thoughts, ideas and feelings. Advertising photography, commercial photography, combines these two. A product photograph or a catalogue photograph shows the products as they are. But they can also use emotional content to, with the misattribution of arousal, create a certain emotional state and then link it to a product to sell it better. You can see this used quite often because emotional marketing is more effective than rational marketing. But this is just to sell products. It's not really very artistic. In a way, it's a misuse of art. And then we can also see the use of photography for interior design, creating art that has nothing, no content, no feeling, no idea. Pictures of beautiful places. Art really got too involved with itself. It got lost in its own idea of itself. But it did that because it had already lost itself. The original wall paintings weren't some sort of great, majestic attempt to copy the gods, some mimesis. They were just replicas of things people owned but couldn't bring with them. Ancestors, boats, horses, dogs, family. All these things were put in paintings and shown on walls. This is the thing that I own, my wife, my children, my estate. And so this was what art was. It was just a way of showing people what somebody had. But with the Christian church, we had the mimesis not just of the daily life of people who had money and power, and of course the ability to paint. They also tried to express the stories and the archetypes that were put across by the Bible, by the other holy texts. Of course, Christianity is not the first religion to use art, but it is the European religion. Europe is Christianity, or was. And so, with this, what we find is Caravaggio taking the scoundrels of the street, and himself, he was a bit of a rascal, a rapscallion, a murderer. He put these people, these characters, in biblical narratives, in art, and therefore preserved them. We see Jesus replicated as a European blonde man. Of course, he was a Jew in Jerusalem. And yet this artistic license allowed the selling of the concept of Christ to new peoples. We see the same thing in Montserrat with the Black Virgin exported to South America. We see the same thing in the kings of Egypt. And so people will take ideas and then rebrand them using art. Art is culture. Culture is art. But the difference is that whereas culture you may think of as being created by a society, art is created almost exclusively by individuals. There are teams of artists, but generally one person's vision will win through, will stamp itself inexorably on a team. And so art is created by individuals, and therefore culture is created by individuals. Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, it was funded by individuals, but it was painted by Michelangelo. And so artists have the ability to create culture. When they look up, they're creating culture that ennobles, that gives people some semblance of a higher order, something to look forward to look up to embody, to embrace, to feel hope for, something that ameliorates the pain of living. And so art has that responsibility, and indeed artists themselves have the responsibility to look up. It's a choice, and it's an arbitrary choice, and that's the thing. It's arbitrary. But it's essential. Because without that choice, without the choice to look up instead of down, or not to look at all, culture itself degrades. Culture itself dissimulates and fades. Which artists now are going to be the prophets of our age? Who's going to be our Da Vinci or Rembrandt? Is it going to be some of the artists that we see in the galleries now? Certainly after the wars, they had Dada, they had a number of different art movements that said art is dead, the world is too horrific, and yet the world has always been horrific. The world has always been tragedy. The world has always been horrible. Hobbes said the life of man is poor, nasty, brutish and short, and it's true. Civilization is a thin veneer on the top of that. But civilization is culture, and culture is created by people who choose arbitrarily to look up. If they fail to do that, and if they stare into the abyss, as Nietzsche said, eventually the abyss will stare back into them, but not just into them, but into us all. And therefore artists and those people who have the ability, by training, by genetic proclivities, to create art, have to do so, but do so positively, to look up to something higher, to create those higher ideals, to provide catharsis and understanding for others, for society at whole. Because otherwise, without the ability to look up, and without the choice of looking up, what is life? It's not just mimesis. The sense of mystery has been lost because it's more difficult to package. It's difficult to sell to a large audience. It's not equal. Can't be equal. Life isn't equal. Nature isn't equal. And therefore, art isn't equal either. It can't be and shouldn't be. It's that choice, that construction of meaning that's essential. And in the absence of the Christianity that Europe embraced for almost 2,000 years, and in the absence of the pagan religions that were embraced before then, it's the people who create those structures, create the art that creates culture, creating order out of chaos. Without that, what is it but a corporate environment of just excising the suffering and pain of life in a futile attempt to sell more products, and actually ending up turning away from young shadow, failing to integrate it, and therefore having it gnaw away, like Freud's id, turned against ourselves, our own animal nature. And so art has to look up, but it also has to look directly into the face of suffering and pain and violence and hatred and fear and terror. It has to look at those things and understand them, or if not understand them, allow some higher force to channel through the artist to provide some understanding of them, or at least some meaning to them. They don't go away. They are a facet of human nature. Comfort itself is actually not such a good goal, as we found out. Suicide has become the biggest cause of death for young people. We have everything, and yet we're not happy. Everything, and not happy, but not contented, and never can be. And so, art, and those with the ability to create art, and I'm not really one of them. I can't paint to save my life. I can't make music, for example. But many people can, and they've been trained to do so by some of the best minds of all the generations, not just alive now, but in the books and the ideas that they've created and in the instruments they've created. This inheritance can be used wisely, or it can be squandered. If you have that gift to create, if you've sharpened that gift with your own efforts and the advice and feedback of others, you owe it not just to yourself, but to everybody, to look up, to make that arbitrary choice, to look up, to create those idols, to create those higher senses of order without which life is meaningless and the suffering of life has no and that's it. Has nothing. Just pure nihilism. Culture is art. Culture is protection. Without it, we are nothing. We are just bumbling along, not even realizing the questions that our ancestors asked, just shuffling along until we die. At the moment, we've gone through a particularly interesting phase of human history. The population has exploded exponentially, and that's largely due to the exploitation of the sunlight that was stored in fossil fuels. As access to them becomes more difficult, more expensive, and more controlled, and the energy return on the investment becomes higher, becomes lower, what's going to happen is the resource scarcity is going to raise its ugly head again. In England, not so long ago, a few hundred years, people used to eat their children. In England, not so very long ago, children used to work on a regular basis. Many of them used to die in childbirth. In July, people would be starving before the harvest came in. And so these times are not so very long ago, and because of the population increases, they're likely to come again. Now, we could say that there is no God in a foxhole. There are no atheists in foxholes, as was said about the First World War, because when it really comes down to it, when death is literally staring you in the face, at that point people find faith, find the need for faith. We've got away from that in our comfort because of resource abundance. Massive comfort for almost everybody. More people die now from overeating than starvation. But how long will that last? How long can this exponential population growth continue with the finite resources available on the world, on the planet? The artists at the moment are looking down, are looking into the abyss, are looking into nothingness and nonsense. And those are the people who have to interpret and ameliorate the suffering. It's not here yet, but it's likely to be. And therefore those artists should step up, to look up, to create culture that is positive, that provides people with a happiness and a contentment and a sense of meaning. It's a duty, and it's also a mantle. It's something that must be borne by those with the ability to bear it.